The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the most recognizable and enduring conflicts of our time. It is a conflict etched in history, fueled by claims to the same land, and marked by cycles of violence and suffering. This conflict is not just a political issue, it's a human issue. It's about families on both sides living in the shadow of fear and uncertainty. It's about children growing up amidst rubble and sirens, their childhoods stolen by a conflict they didn't choose. This conflict is also a story of resilience. It is a story of ordinary people, both Israelis and Palestinians, who yearn for peace and a better future for their children. It's about those who risk their lives to build bridges of understanding and advocate for a just and lasting solution. This is the story of a land torn, a people divided, and the enduring hope for peace. The roots of the conflict trace back to the early 20th century, during the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire led to the division of the Middle East by European powers, igniting tensions. For Jews and Arabs, this land held deep historical and religious significance. The Zionist movement gained momentum, advocating for a Jewish state in Palestine. The influx of Jewish immigrants led to increased tensions with the Arab population. This struggle culminated in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, shaping the conflict today. Gaza, a small coastal strip of land bordering Israel and Egypt, has become a focal point of the conflict. Home to over 2 million Palestinians, Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Decades of occupation sowed seeds of resentment and resistance. The rise of Hamas created further complications. The blockade has had a devastating impact on the civilian population. To grasp the Gaza conflict, we must journey back to the early 20th century, when the seeds of discord were sown. The region was under Ottoman control, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived together. With the rise of nationalism, the Ottoman Empire crumbled, and its territory's fate came into question. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 expressed British support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, while promising to protect the rights of the non-Jewish population. These conflicting promises created a volatile situation, setting the stage for future conflict. Section 2, the Partition Plan and the 1948 War, a catastrophic divide. In 1947, the UN proposed partitioning Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international control. The plan was a recipe for disaster. Jewish leaders accepted it reluctantly. Arab leaders rejected it, seeing it as a betrayal. This led to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Neighboring Arab states joined the fight. The conflict caused widespread displacement. Israel emerged victorious, expanding its territory. Over 700,000 Palestinians became refugees. This event, known as the Nakba, remains deeply traumatic. The war solidified deep mistrust and animosity. Section 3, the Six-Day War and its aftermath, occupation, and resistance. The Six-Day War of 1967 marked another turning point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and Sinai Peninsula. This victory had far-reaching consequences, particularly for the Palestinians. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip shaped lives for decades. Israeli military rule and settlements fueled Palestinian resentment and resistance. The PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, emerged as a key resistance group. Section 4, the Oslo Accords and the Second Intifada, a glimmer of hope, then more despair. The early 1990s witnessed a glimmer of hope with the signing of the Oslo Accords. The accords, brokered by Norway, were hailed as a historic breakthrough. The PLO recognized Israel's right to exist, while Israel recognized the PLO. The accords established the Palestinian Authority as an interim governing body. However, the optimism was short-lived. Rabin's assassination in 1995 dealt a severe blow to the peace process. Continued settlement expansion and violence further undermined peace. In 2000, the Second Intifada erupted, shattering the remnants of hope. The rise of Hamas and the Gaza withdrawal, a new chapter in a long conflict. The early 21st century witnessed the rise of Hamas, a Palestinian Islamist group opposed to the Oslo Accords. In 2006, Hamas won a surprise victory in Palestinian legislative elections. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew its settlers and soldiers from the Gaza Strip. Some saw it as an opportunity for greater Palestinian control, but the withdrawal did not lead to peace or stability. In 2007, Hamas seized full control of Gaza, expelling Fatah forces. The Israeli blockade has had a devastating impact on Gaza's civilian population. Life under blockade. For 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, life is confined by a stifling blockade. Movement is severely restricted, with borders as walls. The blockade controls goods, services, and people. Imposed in 2007, it aimed to pressure Hamas and prevent smuggling. Its effects deeply impact ordinary Gazans. Essential goods are limited, causing chronic shortages. Gazans rely on smuggling tunnels or go without basics. The permit system for travel is arbitrary and unreliable. Patients, students, and families face bureaucratic hurdles. Gaza is an open-air prison, its residents in despair. Section 2, Crumbling Infrastructure, a struggle for basic needs. The blockade's crippling impact on Gaza extends beyond immediate shortages. Years of restricted access to essential materials have crippled Gaza's infrastructure. The electricity supply is unreliable, often subject to disruptions. Blackouts lasting for hours are common, disrupting daily life. Access to clean water is another pressing concern. Gaza's coastal aquifer has been severely depleted and contaminated. The water crisis poses a grave threat to public health. The lack of adequate sanitation infrastructure leads to environmental pollution. The healthcare system in Gaza has been pushed to the brink of collapse. Hospitals and clinics face chronic shortages of essential medicines and medical equipment. The blockade restricts the entry of medical supplies. Even treatable conditions often turn deadly, affecting children and the elderly the most. Section 3. Psychological scars, the unseen wounds of conflict. While the physical devastation in Gaza is starkly visible, the psychological scars of the conflict run deep, leaving an enduring legacy of trauma and despair. Generations of Gazans have grown up amidst conflict, their lives punctuated by military incursions, rocket attacks, and the ever-present threat of violence. This constant state of fear and uncertainty takes a heavy toll on mental well-being, particularly among children. Studies have shown alarming rates of PTSD, anxiety, and depression among Gazan children. Many exhibit signs of trauma, including nightmares, bedwetting, and withdrawal from social interaction. The lack of access to adequate mental health services further exacerbates the problem, leaving many children struggling to cope with the invisible wounds of war. The psychological impact of the blockade extends beyond the immediate experience of violence. The confinement, the lack of opportunities, and the constant struggle for basic needs create a pervasive sense of hopelessness and despair. Many Gazans, particularly young people, feel trapped, their dreams and aspirations stifled by the limitations imposed upon them. This sense of hopelessness can manifest in various ways, from apathy and resignation to risky behaviors and, in some cases, a susceptibility to extremism. Section 4. The weight of despair, poverty and unemployment. The blockade has had a devastating impact on Gaza's economy, plunging its residents into a cycle of poverty and unemployment from which it is increasingly difficult to escape. Once a relatively prosperous territory, Gaza now has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, exceeding 50%. The closure of factories, the collapse of businesses, and the restrictions on trade have left countless Gazans without livelihoods, struggling to provide for their families. The poverty rate in Gaza is staggering, with over half the population living below the poverty line. Many families rely on humanitarian aid to survive, their diets lacking in essential nutrients. The lack of economic opportunities perpetuates a cycle of deprivation, where children inherit their parents' poverty, and the hope for a better future seems increasingly distant. The economic despair has a profound impact on social cohesion. leading to increased crime rates, social unrest, and a breakdown of traditional support systems. The weight of poverty weighs heavily on families, often leading to domestic violence, child labor, and early marriage as coping mechanisms. The once vibrant social fabric of Gaza is slowly unraveling, its threads frayed by the constant struggle for survival. Section 5. A generation in limbo, uncertain futures. The children of Gaza, growing up amidst conflict and deprivation, represent a generation in limbo. The blockade has robbed them of their childhoods, replacing playgrounds with bomb shelters. Their education is constantly disrupted by closures and shortages. Many Gazan youth face a bleak future. The lack of employment opportunities and restrictions on movement leave them feeling trapped. Some dream of leaving Gaza, seeking a better life elsewhere. The international community provides aid but no lasting solution. The cycles of violence and stalled peace process leave Gazans feeling abandoned. Their plight is a stark reminder of the need for a just and lasting peace. Resilience amidst ruins, the spirit of Gaza. Despite immense challenges, the people of Gaza exhibit remarkable resilience, their spirit unbroken by years of conflict. Amidst the ruins, they rebuild their lives, create moments of joy, and hold on to hope. The streets, though scarred by conflict, are filled with life, children playing, vendors selling, and families gathering. The spirit of Gaza is evident in their determination to persevere. A nation forged in conflict. To understand the Gaza conflict, one must grasp Israel's historical and psychological landscape. Born from the Holocaust, Israel carries a deep-seated fear of existential threat. This trauma fuels a profound yearning for security. Since 1948, Israel has faced wars and terrorism. Surrounded by hostile neighbors, security is paramount. The Gaza Strip represents a complex security challenge. Section 2. Living with the rocket threat, a constant shadow of fear. Imagine living with the knowledge that at any moment, a rocket could come crashing down from the sky, turning your life upside down. This is the reality for millions of Israelis living within range of Hamas's rocket fire from Gaza. The piercing sound of air raid sirens, signaling incoming rockets, has become a chilling soundtrack to their lives. The impact of these rocket attacks extends far beyond the physical damage they inflict. The constant threat of attack creates a pervasive sense of fear and anxiety, particularly among children. Schools, businesses, and entire communities are forced to come to a standstill as rockets rain down. The psychological toll of living under such conditions is immeasurable, leaving deep scars on the Israeli psyche. The Iron Dome defense system, developed by Israel to intercept short-range rockets, has provided a crucial layer of protection, significantly reducing casualties. However, the system is not foolproof, and the emotional and psychological impact of living under constant threat remains a heavy burden for many Israelis. Section 3. The price of war scars on the Israeli psyche. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has left an indelible mark on the nation's soul. Years of wars, terrorist attacks, and military service have taken a heavy toll, leaving behind a society grappling with collective trauma and a deep sense of loss. Every Israeli family has a story, a connection to the conflict, whether it's a loved one lost in battle, the emotional scars of military service, or the ever-present fear for their children's safety. The conflict has also led to a hardening of positions on both sides, making dialogue and compromise increasingly difficult. The cycle of violence, with each attack fueling calls for retaliation, perpetuates a climate of fear and mistrust that permeates all aspects of Israeli society. Despite the deep scars left by the conflict, there remains a strong desire for peace among many Israelis. They yearn for a future where their children can live without fear, where dialogue replaces violence, and where a lasting solution can be found that addresses the needs and aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. Section 4. The dilemma of defense balancing security and civilian casualties. One of the most challenging aspects of the Gaza conflict for Israel is the moral dilemma of defending its citizens while minimizing civilian casualties. Hamas, operating within densely populated civilian areas, often uses schools, hospitals, and residential buildings as launching pads for rocket attacks and as human shields. This tactic places Israel in an impossible situation, forcing it to choose between protecting its own civilians and risking the lives of innocent Palestinians. Israel maintains that it takes extensive precautions to avoid civilian casualties, including issuing warnings before strikes, using precision-guided munitions, and targeting only military objectives. However, the reality on the ground is often chaotic and unpredictable, and civilian casualties are an inevitable tragedy of war. The issue of civilian casualties has drawn sharp criticism from international organizations and human rights groups, who accuse Israel of using disproportionate force and failing to adequately protect Palestinian civilians. These accusations fuel anti-Israel sentiment globally, further complicating the conflict and hindering efforts to find a peaceful resolution. Section 5. A shared future. Yearning for peace amidst deep mistrust. The path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians remains elusive, fraught with historical baggage, political complexities, and a deep-seated mistrust that permeates both societies. The failure of past peace initiatives, coupled with ongoing violence and inflammatory rhetoric, has left many feeling disillusioned and hopeless. Despite the challenges, there are glimmers of hope. Grassroots organizations on both sides are working tirelessly to build bridges of understanding and promote dialogue. They recognize that true peace can only be achieved through mutual recognition, empathy, and a willingness to address the legitimate grievances of both sides. A lasting solution requires a fundamental shift in the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, one based on mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision for the future. It demands courageous leadership, a commitment to dialogue, and a willingness to make painful compromises on both sides. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, particularly in Gaza, is a cycle of violence, where actions and reactions fuel endless suffering. Each side feels justified, citing self-defense and historical grievances. Yet both contribute to pain and loss. Rockets from Gaza, intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome, disrupt daily life for Israelis. Israel responds with airstrikes, targeting militants. Civilian areas are caught in the crossfire, leading to casualties and fueling anger. The most heart-wrenching aspect of the Gaza conflict is the devastating human cost, particularly the heavy toll on innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. On both sides, families are torn apart, homes are reduced to rubble, and lives are cut short, leaving behind a legacy of pain, loss, and trauma that transcends generations. In Gaza, the civilian population bears the brunt of the violence. The densely packed urban environment with limited infrastructure and resources provides little protection from airstrikes or artillery fire. Hospitals, schools, and UN shelters have all been hit during previous rounds of fighting, raising concerns about the proportionality and legality of some Israeli tactics. The constant threat of violence has a profound impact on the mental and emotional well-being of Gazan children, many of whom exhibit signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. Their childhoods are stolen, replaced with the fear of sirens, the loss of loved ones, and the uncertainty of a future overshadowed by conflict. The human cost of this conflict extends beyond immediate casualties. The psychological scars, the economic devastation, and the erosion of social fabric leave a lasting impact on both societies, perpetuating a cycle of pain and resentment that makes reconciliation even more elusive. While both Israelis and Palestinians experience pain and loss, the impact on Gaza has been particularly devastating. Gaza faces a humanitarian crisis due to the blockade and repeated military operations. The blockade has severely restricted the flow of goods and people, crippling its economy and pushing its population into poverty. Repeated cycles of violence have left Gaza's infrastructure in ruins. Thousands are displaced and struggling to rebuild their lives. The international community calls for an end to the blockade, but progress towards a solution remains elusive. Section 4. Trauma and loss, a legacy of pain. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, especially in Gaza, has left a profound legacy of trauma and loss. Generations have grown up amidst violence, witnessing the horrors of war and the impact of displacement and occupation. For Palestinians, The Nakba of 1948, when many were displaced during Israel's creation, remains deeply traumatic. The loss of their homeland and decades of conflict fuel a sense of historical injustice. On the Israeli side, the Holocaust serves as a stark reminder of anti-Semitism's consequences and the need for a secure Jewish state. This historical trauma shapes Israel's security policies and perception of threats. Both societies must acknowledge past traumas and work towards a future where violence is not the answer. This requires empathy, understanding, and difficult conversations about the conflict's root causes and the path to peace. Section 5. Breaking the cycle, a shared responsibility. Breaking the cycle of violence in Gaza and the broader conflict requires a multifaceted approach. It demands shared responsibility from Israelis, Palestinians, and the international community to prioritize dialogue and compromise. Addressing Gaza's humanitarian situation, lifting the blockade, and allowing free movement are crucial steps. This would alleviate suffering, create economic opportunities, and foster dialogue. Addressing political issues is essential for lasting peace, including meaningful negotiations on borders, settlements, Jerusalem, and refugees. A shift in mindset is needed, moving away from a zero-sum mentality. Recognizing the humanity of the other and acknowledging legitimate grievances is vital. Working together can build a future where both Israelis and Palestinians thrive. Section 1. The roots of mistrust. A legacy of broken promises. Mistrust is a significant obstacle to peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This mistrust is rooted in a history of broken promises, failed negotiations, and cycles of violence. For Palestinians, the Nakba of 1948 remains a raw wound, fostering a deep sense of injustice. Decades of occupation and exile have eroded faith in peaceful coexistence. Israelis, remembering past wars and terrorist attacks, feel an existential threat. Hamas's charter and ongoing rocket fire from Gaza justify their fears. This mutual mistrust creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, making peace difficult. Section 2. Intractable issues, land, settlements, and refugees. The conflict is complicated by intractable issues with historical baggage. These core issues have been stumbling blocks in past peace negotiations. The expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank is contentious. Palestinians view settlements as an attempt to annex land for a future state. Settlements fragment Palestinian territory, hindering development and fueling resentment. The plight of Palestinian refugees is another unresolved issue. The right of return for refugees is a core demand of Palestinian leadership. Israel rejects this right, fearing demographic changes. Creative solutions and political will are needed to address these issues. Section 3. The rise of extremism, fueling the flames of conflict. Extremism on both sides complicates the conflict, injecting intolerance and violence. Groups like Hamas reject Israel's right to exist and advocate armed struggle. Their violence deepens hatred and mistrust, hindering moderate voices. The Israeli settler movement fuels tensions and undermines a two-state solution. Some extremist settlers engage in violence against Palestinians. Extremism creates a climate of fear and rejection of compromise. This dynamic threatens peace and perpetuates violence and suffering. Section 4. The failure of leadership, missed opportunities, and political impasse. The conflict has seen missed opportunities for peace due to leadership failures. Palestinian internal divisions between Fatah and Hamas hinder negotiations. Israel exploits these divisions, undermining Palestinian statehood claims. Israel's political landscape has shifted rightward, making compromise difficult. Leaders fear electoral backlash for advocating concessions. The absence of visionary leadership perpetuates the conflict. Mistrust festers, extremism grows, and opportunities for peace slip away. Section 5. International impotence. A world divided and a conflict unresolved. The conflict exposes the international community's limitations in addressing entrenched conflicts. Efforts have been piecemeal, reactive, and lacking political will and unity. Geopolitical rivalries entangle the conflict, with countries taking sides based on interests. This lack of unity emboldens both sides to pursue maximalist positions. The international community's failure to address root causes allows violence to continue. Section 1. A world stage, the international community's role in seeking peace. The conflict has long been a focal point for international mediation and aid. Efforts have evolved from early mediation to humanitarian aid and diplomatic pressure. Despite decades of involvement, peace remains elusive. Geopolitical dynamics complicate international engagement. The United States plays a pivotal role but faces criticism for perceived bias. A unified international approach is needed for a just and lasting peace. Section 2. Shifting sands, evolving alliances and regional dynamics. Regional alliances and geopolitical shifts complicate the conflict. The Cold War saw superpower rivalry influencing the conflict. The post-Cold War era brought new challenges and opportunities. The Oslo Accords raised hopes for a two-state solution. The failure of Oslo and the rise of Hamas led to renewed violence. The international community struggled to adapt to this new reality. Divisions within the international community hamper efforts. A lack of consensus on moving forward hinders progress. Section 3. A history of interventions, from diplomacy to humanitarian aid. International involvement has ranged from diplomacy to humanitarian aid. UN peacekeeping forces have monitored ceasefires and provided aid. Their effectiveness is limited by mandates and political realities. Humanitarian aid is vital in Gaza, where the blockade creates a dire situation. Organizations like UNRWA provide essential services to Palestinian refugees. Reliance on aid creates dependency and fails to address root causes. The focus on aid should not overshadow the need for a political solution. Addressing occupation, settlements, and self-determination is crucial. Section 4. The power of pressure, sanctions, condemnation, and international law. The international community uses sanctions, condemnation, and international law to influence behavior. The BDS movement advocates economic and cultural pressure on Israel. BDS is controversial, seen as both nonviolent resistance and counterproductive. The UN Security Council condemns settlement activity and calls for a two-state solution. The US veto limits the effectiveness of these resolutions. The ICC investigates alleged crimes in the conflict. The investigation faces opposition from Israel and its allies. Upholding human rights and accountability is essential for peace. Section 5. A call to action towards a more just and sustainable peace. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains a tragic reminder of the human cost of unresolved conflict and the limitations of traditional peace building. The international community must move beyond the status quo and work towards a more just and sustainable peace, addressing the root causes and recognizing the aspirations of both sides. A renewed effort is needed, prioritizing human security, providing humanitarian assistance, and promoting economic development. Investing in people-to-people initiatives that foster dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation is crucial. Promoting inclusive governance and the rule of law is essential for a just and lasting peace. Amplifying the voices of moderation and peace within both societies can help bridge divides and counter extremist narratives. Achieving peace requires a sustained effort, transcending political expediency and embracing a vision of shared security and peaceful coexistence. Beyond the impasse, a new paradigm for peace. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza highlights the human cost of unresolved conflict. Decades of violence and mistrust fuel a sense of hopelessness. A new paradigm for peace is urgently needed. It requires a shift from a zero-sum mentality to mutual recognition and justice. True peace demands justice, equality, and mutual recognition. At the heart of any successful peace-building effort lies the imperative of empathy, the ability to see the world through the eyes of the other and to recognize the shared humanity that binds us, even in the midst of conflict. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where decades of violence and propaganda have created deep divisions and hardened narratives, fostering empathy is both essential and incredibly challenging. Empathy does not require condoning violence or ignoring legitimate grievances. It does not demand abandoning one's own identity or beliefs. Rather, it calls for a willingness to listen, to seek understanding, and to acknowledge the pain and suffering endured by both sides. It requires recognizing that behind the political slogans and entrenched positions lie human beings with hopes, dreams, fears, and the universal desire for peace and security. Fostering empathy requires creating spaces for meaningful encounters, where Israelis and Palestinians can interact on a human level, share their stories, and challenge the stereotypes and prejudices that have taken root over generations. It demands amplifying the voices of moderation and peace, those who are working tirelessly to build bridges of understanding and reconciliation. If empathy forms the foundation for peace, then dialogue and engagement are the building blocks upon which a just and sustainable future can be constructed. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where communication has often been reduced to accusations, threats, and pronouncements of unwavering positions, creating spaces for meaningful dialogue is crucial for breaking down barriers, fostering understanding, and identifying pathways to a shared future. Dialogue, in this context, is not about avoiding difficult conversations or pretending that deep divisions and historical grievances do not exist. It is not about one side imposing its will on the other or dictating the terms of peace. Rather, it is about creating a safe and respectful space where Israelis and Palestinians can come together as equals, listen to each other's narratives, acknowledge each other's pain, and explore common ground upon which a just and lasting peace can be built. This dialogue should not be limited to political leaders or official negotiators. It must involve a broad cross-section of society, including youth, women, religious leaders, artists, and business people. It requires creating opportunities for Israelis and Palestinians to interact on a human level, to build relationships based on trust and understanding, and to challenge the stereotypes and prejudices that have taken root over generations. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has global implications, impacting regional stability and fueling international tensions. The international community must move beyond being a bystander and become a proactive catalyst for peace. This requires addressing both immediate violence and underlying conditions, use diplomatic, economic, and political leverage to hold all parties accountable, investigate and prosecute those responsible for crimes, and impose targeted sanctions. Invest in a just and sustainable peace by addressing root causes like occupation and settlements, support economic development and people-to-people initiatives for reconciliation, provide increased support to civil society organizations and peace-building initiatives. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, despite its long and painful history, is not destined to continue indefinitely. The future, while uncertain, remains unwritten, holding the potential for a different narrative, one where peace, justice, and coexistence prevail over hatred, violence, and despair. This hope for a better future is not based on naivete or a Pollyannish disregard for the very real challenges that lie ahead. It is a hope grounded in the recognition that the status quo is not sustainable, that the cycle of violence and suffering exacts an unbearable toll on both societies, and that a different path, however difficult, must be found. This hope is fueled by the courage and resilience of ordinary Israelis and Palestinians, those who refuse to succumb to despair, who dare to dream of a different future, and who are working tirelessly, often at great personal risk, to build bridges of understanding and reconciliation. The path to peace will be long and arduous, fraught with obstacles and setbacks, but the human spirit's capacity for compassion, forgiveness, and the pursuit of justice should never be underestimated. The journey towards peace begins with a single step, a choice to embrace hope over despair, dialogue over violence, and a shared future over a divided past.